the Texas School Book Depository Building, Dallas. From this sixth-floor window, Lee Harvey Oswald allegedly fired the shots that killed the President of the United States on November the 22nd, 1963. Lee Harvey Oswald, a figure of mystery, murdered before he could reveal what he knew. While the truth about him remains obscure, the myths abound.
He was average Joe, that was all.
He was behaving like someone who was belligerent and not showing any remorse for anything he had done.
He was a nice fella, seemed like. Very courteous, nicely kept.
Oswald was the perfect patsy. He looked guilty, not just of the murder, but of anything.
A very sullen, dark kind of a man that I wouldn't want to be friends with.
He seemed to be such a nice man, and everybody thought he was, and he appeared to be, because he was very good with children.
And he started making a villain out of a man who genuinely was probably a hero.
Oswald was a pretty interesting fellow. He's not nearly the one-dimensional character that the Warren Commission has painted him to be. He was in the Marine Corps and did very well. He had a high security clearance. He was stationed over at Sugi. He was a radar operator. In fact, he was one of the guys that would track the U-2 flights over Russia. So it's not like he was the perennial loser that we tend to have this image of him now.
One person with no illusions about Oswald's role launched his own investigation into the Kennedy assassination in 1967. The former district attorney of New Orleans, Judge Jim Garrison.
He was employed by the Central Intelligence Agency, and he was obviously drawn into a scapegoat situation and made to believe ultimately that he was penetrating the assassination. And then when the time came, they took the scapegoat, the man who thought he was working for the United States government, and killed him real quick. And then the machinery, disinformation machinery started turning, and they started making a villain out of a man who genuinely was probably a hero.
We found a great amount of communist literature, communist books. I couldn't tell you just what all it was, but it was a large box.
Mr. Oswald, you told us that you had never owned a rifle or a gun or a weapon of any sort. Is that right? And he said, that's right. I never owned a gun in my life. So Captain Fritz showed him the photograph and said, well, how do you explain this? He looked at it and he got visibly mad. He seemed shaken and he said, well, that's just simply my face superimposed on someone else's body there. That's all that is.
Lee Harvey Oswald is a question mark to history. The debate is often raised, was Lee Harvey Oswald alone as the assassin, or was he part of a conspiracy? The question is never raised, is it possible that he didn't do it at all?
Judyth's story, told here for the first time, changes forever our understanding of Lee Harvey Oswald and his role in history. As a young schoolgirl, Judyth excelled in science. Her exceptional abilities were soon drawing local and then national attention.
When I was in high school, I noticed that I was focusing on things that were of interest to the military. My work with cancer, my work with, getting metal out of seawater and all that, excited a great deal of interest. I gave lung cancer to mice faster than it had ever been done before with all their big labs and everything else. They were astonished. And they even went to my school and checked everything out, and of course I had all the proof. All the doors opened from there. I found myself invited as soon as I could graduate. I was sent to Buffalo, New York, to the oldest and most prestigious, at that time, cancer research center in the United States, Roswell Park Memorial Institute for Cancer Research, under the auspices of Dr. Deal and Dr. Ochsner.
Dr. Alton Ochsner, one of the world's leading cancer specialists, was fiercely anti-communist. He was to play a crucial role in Judyth's life. Without realizing it, she was being subtly drawn into clandestine research work. This became apparent in 1962, when she became a full-time student at the University of Florida in Gainesville.
I was getting specialized in deadly cancers. It was made clear to me by the time I entered the University of Florida, they didn't want people knowing that we were working on projects that might have to do with eventually competing with Russia on the matter of using cancer as a bioweapon.
In the spring of 1963, Judyth was invited to join Dr. Ochsner in New Orleans on a temporary assignment. It was an exciting offer for the young scientist. The Ochsner Clinic and its founder were world-renowned.
Dr. Alton Ochsner, who was famous as the first physician to link smoking and cancer, and who had many military and government connections, he said he needed me there and that he wanted me to work in the bone cancer lab with Dr. Mary Sherman. Dr. Mary Sherman was working on some cutting-edge research, and the blood sedimentation work I was doing they thought would be valuable. On top of that, he'd been telling me what to do for a couple of years now.
The following week, she went to the main post office to pick up a letter from her husband-to-be.
When I reached for it, I dropped the newspaper, and this very clean-cut young gentleman standing behind me picked it up and handed it back. I looked at him, and he smiled, and he's young like I am, and he was so clean-cut and so polite that when he asked me if he could walk me home, I said yes.
In May 1963, Oswald moved into an apartment on Magazine Street, a short walk from Judyth's. He was joined from Dallas by his pregnant wife, Marina, and their baby daughter, June.
From time to time, if he had an argument with Marina, he would simply go to my apartment, which was about 7 blocks away as the crow flies. As this was a very busy street, we could get on a bus at any time, and of course we did. We rode the bus, the magazine bus, to and from work at Riley.
6 months before the assassination, Oswald had taken a mundane job with the Riley Coffee Company, but it seems his real activities were centered a few blocks away. From a small office on the corner of Lafayette and Camp Street, Oswald managed a local chapter of the pro-Castro Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Operating from an adjoining office was a sinister figure named Guy Bannister.
About Guy Bannister, it's difficult to say much about him because he always stood in the shadows and pushed someone else to the front. He was a strongly disciplined man, perhaps the outgrowth of his many years as a special agent in charge of the Chicago office of the F.B.I. But he was a key man in the assassination. And that's clear from the fact that Oswald's sheep dipping, his being portrayed as a communist, was done out of Guy Bannister's office. So he was sheep dipped for months as a communist by given literature. Lee, hand this out today, this is your assignment. I came across the fact that Oswald, a private in the Marines, had taken a Russian examination. And I knew the privates did not take Russian examinations unless they were connected with intelligence. So that caused me to be curious about 544 Camp, which was the address stamped on one circular that they gave out one time before, obviously, Bannister told him, Lee, no more addresses. It turned out that was a side address of Guy Bannister's private detective agency. Well, I went down there to look at it, and I found myself not merely outside of Guy Bannister's office, but across the street from Naval Intelligence, across the street from Secret Service. Around the corner was the Crescent City garage, the garage for the intelligence community. And then 2 doors away, the Riley Coffee Company. I used to be in the F.B.I. I knew people in Naval Intelligence, and they were either across the street, around the corner. The whole intelligence community was there, and right in the middle of it was Guy Bannister having Oswald sheep dipped as a communist.
Well, I have studied Marxist philosophy, yes, sir, and also other philosophers.
But are you a Marxist? I think you did admit on an earlier radio interview that you consider yourself a Marxist.
Well, I would very definitely say that I am a Marxist. That is correct. But that does not mean, however, that I'm a communist.
What is the difference between the two?
Well, there's a great deal of difference. Several American parties in several countries are based on Marxism, such as Ghana. Certain countries have characteristics of a socialist system, such as Great Britain with its socialized medicine. These, then, are the differences between an outright communist country and countries which adhere to leftist or Marxist principles.
Unwittingly, Judyth's drawn into a deadly game.
David Ferry's apartment was the upper half of a white Spanish-style building, and we entered from the back.